I am Primal Piggy. You can find me on Facebook by typing the @ the Primal Piggy, all one word. I'm also cross-posting this video today to Whips, Chains, and Duct Tape. That is a very large BDSM educational Facebook page, and numerous additional other resources available, different groups and different pages that are specific to like the LGBTQ community, a page for littles, a page for polyamory, several different pages within that one resource, several different groups. You can find the main page on Facebook with the @ WCDT BDSM, all together, all one. Today we're going to be continuing our BDSM foundational series, where we're trying to help shape the community, the BDSM community that we want to see. And we're going to be talking today about discipline. The D in BDSM, BD, also stands for discipline. And so discipline has been a hallmark of BDSM since that phrase has, it used to be, bondage and discipline, and then sadomasochism, all of those together. And then at one point, someone discovered as well that the D and the S inside also meant dom and submission, and so or dominant and submission. But originally it was bondage and discipline, and then sadism and masochism all together to make BDSM. And so discipline has been a part of that. It's also very foundational. We're going to be borrowing again from the slave training format, from the master-slave relationship dynamic, and we're going to be seeing which things we can pick out of that relationship dynamic and add to whatever our relationship dynamics are, whether they're DS, DDLG, or any others that exist. I'm gonna go ahead and pull my notes up here. Punishments. Punishments are key to discipline, to maintaining discipline, and they have three main purposes in regards to power exchange relationships. First, punishment is meant to serve as a physical reminder to correct incorrect or bad behavior. The number one tool for a punishment is that it is involved in behavior modification. You're trying to modify behavior. You're trying to bring the submission out of a submissive and to exercise the dominance as a dominant. And you are trying to shape and mold your submissive to the behavior that is correct for your dynamic as a dom directs. And so it's a punishment is meant to serve as a physical reminder, not always a corporal punishment reminder. So it's not always spanking, as we'll see, but it is physical, and it is meant to correct incorrect or bad behavior. It's meant to modify behavior. Second, punishment is meant to encourage a submissive not to earn punishment in the future. So it's supposed to be something that the submissive doesn't like. And finally, punishment is meant to release the submissive of all feelings of guilt and remorse over the offense that warranted the punishment in the first place. And so it's meant to be a way of moving forward, a way of not getting caught in, a way of not carrying things or carrying baggage in the relationship, but resolving an issue, resolving an incorrect or a bad behavior, and then moving forward, leaving all of that in the past. And so let's go over some guidelines to consider when determining, what type of punishment method you want to use, and then when you should administer it and how to enforce it. And so the number one golden rule of punishment is not meant to be a reward. there really is no such thing as a punishment. A punishment is just a word for something a submissive should ask for if your dynamic allows for it, asking for a submissive masochist asking for some type of impact or some type of play that involves pain. And so a masochist asking for pain is much different. Sometimes people will call that a punishment, but really putting the words fun and punishment together. But punishment in a disciplined sense is not meant to be a reward. It should be feared and never fun. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Punishment is not meant to be a reward. It should be feared and never fun. This is the golden rule of punishment because we want to modify behavior. We don't want to encourage bad behavior or encourage incorrect behavior. We want to modify behavior and encourage correct and good behavior. And so many submissives may also be masochistic, and they may crave the pain of a spanking or a whip used on them. Punishment is very different, and it should be unique from any practice play methods. For instance, if you use a paddle for punishment, that paddle, and often any use of a paddle at all, should be limited to punishment and not play. So if you're into impact play and you use one of these trusty things, say this was my if this was my punishment paddle, I would hang it on the wall. It has a way to hang it. I would hang it on the wall, and if there was to be a punishment to be given, I would have the submissive go get this paddle off of the wall, and then go and get in the correct punishment or waiting for punishment position on the floor, and then we would talk about this would be laying out in front of her, and we would talk about her punishment. We would talk about the behavior and what the incorrect behavior was, what the correct behavior would be, and then I would administer the punishment, and then afterwards she would clean the paddle and rehang it back on the wall for me. And so that would be if we used paddling and used a paddle, we wouldn't pull this down for play. We wouldn't pull this down for a scene. This would hang on the wall, and it would be the punishment paddle. It would always be the punishment paddle. So I wouldn't use a real nice one like this. I would get a less expensive wooden one, for instance, in my dynamic, because this is leather wrapped. It's very high quality, and it's meant for play scenes of impact. So that wouldn't be something that I would use because I wouldn't want it to just be hanging on the wall a lot, because my submissive is a very good girl, and she very rarely does anything that would need punishment. Actually, we haven't had any punishment needed because she is very mature and really, she runs whips, chains, and duct tape. So she is very knowledgeable about the lifestyle and very good at her role as a submissive. And so if you use a paddle for punishment, that paddle, and sometimes perhaps any use of a paddle, may be limited to punishment and not play. You always want to keep your boundaries in place so you don't confuse or shake the submissive sense of security. Remember, we want to maintain consistency. Consistency is very important in a DS, DDLG, MS relationship dynamic. Any of the relationship dynamics that you're in, consistency is very important, because without consistency leads to a breakdown of that relationship dynamic. Secondly, we want to be clear on what warrants a punishment and how it will be enforced. Oftentimes we in like a DDLG or a DS will have some of those different rules. So the submissive will know what actions will cause a negative reaction and warrant a punishment, will know what is expected of them, what the rules are, and also they'll know what sort of punishment to expect. ultimately, or what choice of several methods of punishment should be expected until the dominant decides. And so, really, it would be up to me if I wasn't into using the paddle, and we had 3 or 4 different types of punishments for me to choose from. She would know that it would be one of those, depending on what I felt was best to correct the incorrect or the bad behavior. And so, in most cases, the various punishment methods should be explained before the relationship dynamic is in effect, and which degree of punishment is warranted for what specific offense. You don't want to leave the submissive feeling set up to fail in regards to punishment. That might work in various forms of S&M play, but punishment should be taken seriously because it's not a game. So you want to let them know what to expect. Ultimately, we want to modify our submissive's behavior in such a way that that the behavior itself is actually changed. We, in the process of training and in the process of incorporating these protocols, we are trying to shape our submissive's life. And even though oftentimes our power exchange is limited, it will have influence over our submissive's behavior because it helps our submissive feel more submissive, and it helps bring fulfillment into that submissive's life. And remember, protocol ultimately takes things that are somewhat mundane, some everyday things that don't really have any life of their own, and it injects life, and it turns something that wouldn't necessarily be BDSM into BDSM, or through protocol, so that somebody can find fulfillment, excitement, adventure in doing something as simple as making a cup of coffee, for instance. And so, third, we want to follow through with the stated punishment methods, as our rules indicate. Not being punished or having the expected punishment changed on them unexpectedly will threaten the trust relationship and can go so far as to unhinge the entire relationship. So we want to take punishments seriously, because as a dominant, because our submissive does. And remember, if you're inconsistent, if you don't have consistency, it breaks down the trust in your relationship, and if it goes too far, it can really unhinge the entire relationship dynamic altogether. 4, we want to be sure specific punishment methods encourage the correct behavior. If a specific method of punishment proves to be ineffective, reconsider how the submissive is responding and come up with something that will be effective. After all, punishment is not about taking revenge or retribution on a submissive for failing you. It's about teaching the submissive to behave in an appropriate manner and cleanse them from the past wrongdoing. So punishment is about behavior modification. It's about a lot of times it's about helping a submissive. If your submissive is younger, helping them mature, helping them grow up. Even if they were a little in a DDLG or a mommy boy dynamic, even if they're a little, there will be some aspects of, because they're still an adult, they're not a minor, they're still an adult, so there still will be some aspects emotionally and physically, and more so physically, in the things that they do, that they'll need some maturity. They'll need to grow up, and even though they will feel small, and they will feel in more of a childlike mindset, they still, as an adult, need to have good character. They need to have integrity. They need to act a certain way that grown-ups act in some situations, especially in their vanilla world. And so you're going to want to help shape and mold them and change their behavior to help them grow up in the areas where it's important. They can be little in the areas where being little is important, and then they can be grown up in the areas where being grown up is important, so that you can merge the two of and create a good balance for that type of submissive. So oftentimes as a dominant, we're helping our submissive grow, and ultimately as ourselves, we're helping ourselves grow in maturity as dominants. But in the submissive, we're helping them grow and change and alter their behavior to weed out bad character and bad behavior, and get into a place where they are strong and stable and healthy emotionally, physically, and that there is a lot of fulfillment and just growth overall. You never want to punish in anger. It's not about getting even. It's all about correcting behavior and helping the submissive learn from their mistakes. If you're angry when you punish, you're likely to cause more problems than the punishment was meant to solve. You need to take some time, as we'll see in a minute, to maybe get them in a certain slave position and kind of walk away for a moment to gather yourself, to kind of cool down, and then come back and then punish after you've cooled down. And so once punishment has been handed out, the submissive will be in a fragile state of mind. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you give aftercare. The punishment may be over, but the punishment process is not. It's until you have administered aftercare, just as you would for an intense S&M play scene. Now it's time for a quiet, like a one-on-one constellation with your punished submissive, reassuring them. And it's your job as the dominant to help channel all the guilt and remorse out and away with the pain and often the tears. And the submissive should be reminded repeatedly that the offense is done, the punishment is over, it's all in the past, and really those past actions should have no more bearing on the future unless there's a repeat behavioral problem. You never want to abandon the submissive until their emotional state is settled and you both feel reconciled with one another. This is crucial to maintaining the trust and the security of a power exchange relationship. It's important to reinforce that consistency. And so 7, in a polyamorous dynamic or a house slave situation, it can be valuable to ensure that all members of the household are present in observation of the implementation of punishment. This creates a humbling factor for the one punished in front of their peers and serves as a reminder to all of what happens when they misbehave. So if you're in a more polyamorous dynamic where you have multiple submissives, not if your other people in your other polyamorous relationships are not involved in your dynamic at all, then they shouldn't be present. But if they are involved if there's several dominants and submissives all together, or more of a house situation, more of a family, and more of a leather family or somewhat, then punishment should happen in front of the other submissives to serve as a reminder to help reinforce correct behavior overall in the household. 8, make sure you communicate well with the submissive as to what different offenses mean in terms of the power exchange and protocol dynamics. The ultimate offense is disrespecting the dominant, and you should show them how their actions are disrespecting you as the dominant and disrespecting the relationship. And so if it's more than just performing a certain slave position incorrectly, if it's more about if they did something wrong or disrespectful, then they were ultimately disrespecting you as the dominant, and they were disrespecting your power exchange dynamic. That's oftentimes why things like bratty behavior and those types of things, even though we get a bad rap for speaking out, more so as keeping those things out of DS and out of DDLG and certainly out of MS relationship dynamics, and keeping them limited to top and bottom scenes, is because that type of play often disrespects the power exchange dynamic overall. And so it can be a very fine line, in other words. And so when you have that type of when that is outside of play scenes and comes into the rest of the dynamic, then it can be a lot of disrespect, and it can ultimately lead to the breakdown of consistency and the breakdown of the overall power exchange relationship. And we get a lot of questions and things on our page about that. And because when we have over 100,000 people, we get a lot of different responses from people, and overwhelmingly that type of thing ultimately breaks down the dynamic and causes a lot of problems. So in your specific dynamic, you may feel like it works, but overall we see a lot more. And are exposed to a lot more things, and we see where it breaks down relationship dynamics. And so the ultimate offense is disrespecting the dominant. You always want to have a submissive who is respecting the dominant. And so we want their actions and their behavior to respect the dom sub relationship dynamic overall. There are specific acts of punishment that should be avoided at all cost. The goal is to correct behavior, improve the quality of the submissive service, and grow the submissive mentally and emotionally through the process, but not cause them to withdraw into an emotional nightmare or lose trust in the dominant. If your submissive has any kind of mental health issues, any kind of mental health or mental health illnesses, or any of those types of things, you definitely got to take those things into account. If they're still healing from abuse and past abuse and trauma, then some types of punishment that trigger them and they associate with that past trauma or that past abuse can really be can work against you and can be bad. So we want to know what types of punishments are soft limits and which ones are hard limits. Soft limits were ones that we can do, but we should be really cautious about using. And then hard limits would be things that are off the table completely, and we shouldn't really do them at all. And so you definitely want to have talked about some of those different types of things before you start implementing punishments and causing stepping on a lot of emotional landmines and causing a lot of carnage. And so let's talk about. So we talked about the different purposes of punishment. That it's meant to be a physical reminder to correct incorrect or bad behavior. It's meant to encourage the submissive not to earn punishment again, and it is meant to release the submissive all feelings of guilt. We looked at some of the different overall guidelines. So let's look at some of the punishment techniques that you can use in your relationship dynamic. So one technique is called corner time. And now there is an endless list of punishment techniques that you can use. You can get very creative, and you can even get creative with some of these. But corner time is it gives the submissive time to think and reflect on their actions or their behavior that led to the need for discipline. And so, whether the psychology behind a corner time is whether it's from childhood memories of being put in the corner, humiliation, or simply denial of the dominant's attention while in the corner time has been proven useful with many submissives. And so you basically want to have the submissive stand, sit, kneel, or be in one of the slave positions in the corner with their face to the corner, ensuring that there are no distractions in the corner to distract the submissive from thoughts of the offense that put them in that mode of discipline, or in that mode of punishment. And so determine the duration of the corner time before it begins, but it's really the dominant's prerogative whether or not to share that knowledge with the submissive. In other words, you can put a submissive in corner time and it's for 5 minutes, but you just tell them to be in the corner, and you may or may not share with them that it's going to be 5 minutes. So for all they know, it could be 5 hours, but you already have the specific time frame, and you want to definitely know how long your submissive can stand or sit or kneel in a certain position according to health and their health and their safety, because you want to correct bad behavior, but you don't want to, and you want it to be uncomfortable, but you don't want to it to ultimately be destructive. You want to take good care of your property. And so often a dominant will want the submissive not to move around, spending corner time in a defined slave position, or perhaps with their nose on the wall. There's also one where you have them hold a coin, like a penny or a quarter, on the wall with their nose, and so they put their nose to the wall, holding the coin. Sometimes in a standing position, oftentimes up on their toes with their arms behind their back, leaning and holding that. Sometimes you may put things underneath their heels or under their feet. Oftentimes it can be, any different number of things like that. Let's look at nudity can be a powerful humiliation tool if you need to take your boastful submissive back a few notches, or you want them to experience vulnerability that brings a heightened state of vulnerability. There are non-physical types of punishment. These techniques could range from verbal lectures to really the sky's the limit. Let's briefly talk about spanking. And then I have to go, and we'll have kind of a part B of this. I have to go do some other things here today. That was my alarm going off to let me know I had a prior engagement. We'll talk about spanking real fast. If you use spanking as punishment, you should define how it's implemented well before it's actually implemented. Describe what you'll do, and how you'll carry it out, what you'll use: a paddle, a whip, a cane, how many strokes, and even how the spanking will unfold. You may want to use the different slave positions, of course. The physical pain of a punishment combined with the emotional guilt of disappointing or failing the dominant is what helps something like spanking be a good form of punishment. Typically it's on the buttocks, but it can be any part of the body that you choose within safety, within knowing where you should and shouldn't. Take care that you spank only in areas that have large muscle groups. You shouldn't be over vital organs or bones, veins, nerves, or sensitive parts of the body that can cause real and serious harm. If you don't know, then don't use that as a punishment. Oftentimes there's different types, like over the knee spanking of the buttocks, oftentimes with a hand. Spanking while the submissive is in the punishment position, like caning or cropping of the buttocks, the meaty parts of the legs, the stomach, the breasts, using a crop on genitals, placing the submissive in different slave positions in order to do that, spread eagle, or using something like a St. Andrew's cross. Another technique here is essays. An essay punishment is used to provide a redundant and unpleasant reminder of the offense and how it will not be repeated in the future, like a written assignment. Specific. You assign the submissive a specific number of words, pages, or repetitious written statements, often called writing lines. Can be done on paper, can be done in an electronic form, on a blackboard, on a whiteboard. Any different method that you can come up with. They make long rolls of paper that you can hang on the wall and make them write standing on the wall on their tiptoes. You can be very creative with it, and so you can hang something, like I said, on the wall with tacks, make them stand on their tiptoes and make them write. You can use humiliation and degradation. That can be a really powerful tool, but the goal of the method is to reach an emotional point where the submissive realizes they're not in control and they have to answer for their wrongdoing. Let me just kind of skip down here. It can range from verbally degrading the submissive to dehumanizing them into acts of service. You can make them clean, or like if their bad habit is leaving dirty socks on the floor, then being naked on all fours in a leash, they can take one dirty sock at a time in their mouth from the spot and put it in the clothes hanger. And so that could be their punishment. And so you can soak the socks in something before you do it, or you can put something, put in a butt plug, or put in some other device, use some other device on the submissive at the same time to heighten the humiliation or the degradation, make them wear a certain thing or whatnot. You can use a public display if you're part of more of a high protocol dynamic, like in a club or a social activity. Oftentimes a submissive who intentionally misbehaves in public will do so without thinking that their dominant won't do anything at that time. Hoping that they won't punish you till later, and then the dominant won't be as upset. But if you're going, just remember, if you're going to start a punishment in public, you got to finish it that way too, all the way down to the aftercare. And so, if your submissive talks back to another dominant or in some way offends them, you could do something as simple as taking the submissive by the hair, putting them in the slave position on their knees at the offended dominant's feet, and then with them very publicly on display, you could force them into that submissive posture and make them repeat an apology or come up with an apology to the offended dominant. And so that could be a type of punishment in a public place. Repetition. Repetition is a punishment style focused on retraining behavior patterns or bad habits that need to be unlearned. You can have them complete an act or a behavior repetitiously in a way of like building a new habit. The submissive will see consistency in it, and and they will. It shows that the dominant cares enough to be consistent. It creates a positive psychological state where the submissive can learn correct behavior and succeed without feeling beaten down. And so simple repetition is the key. The dominant will often accomplish this by stopping the submissive at the moment of that they first notice the incorrect behavior. The dominant informs the submissive of the incorrect behavior, and once the dominant is sure that the submissive understands what the correct behavior is, they're instructed to do it correctly. And now then the dominant instructs the submissive to repeat the now correct performed behavior for a set number of times. And then last one we'll talk about real fast is a denial of service or attention. Denying a submissive the dominant's time and attention is really a severe punishment, and it's meant to force the submissive to stop and do some self-evaluation. So you're denying service or attention with the goal of them doing self-evaluation. A submissive left with time to reflect and possibly get further punishment yet to come can help persuade them not to repeat bad behavior. This can be used as a buffer. Like I said, if you're angry, you can put them in a slave position, awaiting punishment, go away, cool down, calm down, and then come back and give punishment. This is probably the most psychologically difficult punishment for many submissives to endure. You really got to take a lot of care. If you deny the submissive the dominant's time and attention, oftentimes it feeds into insecurities that the submissives have, and so you definitely want to take really a lot of care if you deny them for a longer period of time. This and all forms of punishment should be clearly stated, and the submissive should know exactly what's to come. Don't leave everything in the wind. Don't just walk away and then ghost them. That's not an appropriate punishment for anyone. Time for self-examination and reflection on what they should have done differently. It can be used before or in combination with other forms of punishment, and it should be used to establish an objective mindset that will lead to a positive outcome for the submissive. If denial of self leads to any other result that is not positive for correcting behavior in the submissive and establishing a more positive mindset in the submissive in the future, then it could cause more damage than good. And so we've gone through several of these, and I'm Primal Piggy. You can find me on Facebook at the Primal Piggy. Like I said, I was also cross-posting these today on whips, chains, and duct tape. You can find them at WCDT BDSM. Next time we'll talk more about tools and whips and crops and different types of things in the next video. And that is all for today. Thank you very much for joining me for this video.